All right. So I'd like to jump into part two of my narrative. Um, so in the first part, I briefly went over the symptoms that I was having, the experiences that I had medically, and a more personal perspective on things. Um, Perhaps in part two, um, I'd like to go over what are the implications of living with long COVID in India, right? Um, let's start, I think, with one of the most important implications, um, and they're not just set out by me; it's set out by the system of medicine itself, which is something that I call the illness disbelief model. So the IDM instead of the illness belief model, uh, where you spend a copious amount of time trying to convince everyone that you're sick, right? And the worst part of chronic illnesses, or the worst part of invisible illnesses, is the fact that there is very limited laboratory testing, there are very limited symptoms. Um, it takes a long time to be able to prove that you that you are ill, and in fact, some medical studies, by their own admission, suggest that it's something like 7 to 10 years to get diagnoses, and more so for syndromes that are relatively new to the systems of medicine. So we spend a lot of time just trying to explain our symptoms, explain it to people, explain it to the doctors, explain it to government institutions, agencies, whatever, just trying to feel heard, feel understood. And I think one of the most important things to consider is the fact that having an illness is not convenient. It's not convenient for the system that exists. Um, there is a system of productivity here in India where you are valued only in terms of the output that you can have. So, whether you are generating revenue, whether you are generating products, whether whatever, right? The value that you have as an individual in the Indian capitalist system is only if you are able to earn the capitalist's money. And this is a system that's replicated all throughout the world. It's not just India specific or South Asia specific, or this is something. This is a capitalist system that exists across the globe. Um, and so I think really here what happens is a perpetuating cycle of fatigue that feeds into an inability to be quote unquote productive. And this continuous cycle is really what leads to the dysfunction. And yeah, that's part of the issue at hand. Um, then comes the difficulty of navigating the healthcare system in India. Um, I understand this is a global problem, but I can speak particularly to the Indian system because that's what I'm exposed to. Um, the first thing that I found very interesting is for the way Indian doctors are trained, they all differ to psychiatry. They all seem to have something very interesting to say about how my mind was making up symptoms and how I was experiencing symptoms and how I'm an anxious individual and so on and so forth. And all of them seem to have fundamental expertise uh, in psychiatry. I think that was very interesting. So I spent a lot of time being underdiagnosed. I wouldn't say misdiagnosed because they didn't try to diagnose me. Um, there was a lot of contradictory advice. One doctor suggests A, the other doctor suggests B, a third doctor suggests C, and then the fourth doctor suggests A with a pinch of C. So it's very interesting. There's a lack of guidance. The doctors themselves didn't seem to know who who I should be referred to, where I should go, what are the testing. Um, I've basically had whole body scans. I've had MRIs, I've had X-rays, I've had ultrasounds, I've had a angiography done, cardiac angiography done, multiple MRIs. I've had a brain MRI, I've had a spine MRI, I've had a trunk MRI, and yeah, and of course these are all out of pocket payments that you make. This is not covered by insurance in India. So these are all out of pocket costs that you have, and it generally has a huge emotional load as you keep explaining to doctors, you know what, there's something wrong. I know that there's something wrong, and this comes from the sense of awareness, embodied cognition that we all have, which is we are mostly, most individuals are aware of their bodies and what constitutes a state of well-being and dis-ease for themselves. They know objectively when things are wrong, and I think it's high time the system takes it seriously. Then there's the recurring costs of medication, testing, supplementation, ongoing nutrition, something that is, I think, very um, something that I think is not spoken about enough, and perhaps I'll do a whole video on that. Um, is the cost that resting has on the body. Um, there is a real economic cost involved when you're unable to be productive, and that can be quite difficult, right? Then we sort of move into the space of the institutionalized dysfunctions. So India has the Rights of People with Disabilities Act, and COVID has been disabling. Uh, I, it has disabled me in certain ways, um, and without a support system, many things would be difficult. But long COVID has been disabling. Um, but what makes or what compounds the difficulty is the fact that institutions do whatever they want, right, despite having a legal framework in place, and there's no checks and measures for it. You could walk from the front to the back of institutes and you'd realize that the ramp is too steep, the rails are incorrectly placed, there's not enough elevators, access is cut off. So it's just that you have to keep jumping through these ableist loops to prove that you have a dysfunction, to prove that you require the support. And it is this inability to I don't understand why, because this is not a personal choice. It's not up to people to decide whether or not they want to accommodate individuals. It's simply a human right. You have to have your difficulties accommodated for. And so when access is cut off, when ramps are, blocked, when the staircases are built incorrectly, The steps are too steep, the ramp is too steep, right? The ground remains uneven, there's constant construction. How are individuals supposed to access a space, right? And that's a whole other thing that I would like to spend some time talking about, perhaps, you know. And that leads us to the wider dysfunction, which is that uh, community support for disability is very sorely lacking. We are just unable to, as a national community, accommodate individual differences. Um, and I understand that's also because we're a collective. So it becomes difficult to make space for every individual, but there is a common denominator, there's a common dysfunction, there's a common whatever is happening between individuals that the system can and has to make the space for, simply because this is legally mandated. This is a legal precedent. This is not a personal choice, right? It is not up to people to decide whether or not they would like to allow you the access to a ramp or an elevator or a space. That's not up to people, right? And so when you spend so much of time battling real people, the obvious thing that you turn to is then an online community, right? And that's where I found the space to be myself, to express my difficulties, to have my difficulties heard, to be there for other people as well, right? And I think that's an important part of the whole system, right? And so I think it's very important for me to highlight that there are so many misconceptions that need to just be eliminated, right? The first one, perhaps the only one that really bothers me, is the fact that we view disability or difficulty or impairment as some kind of individual moral failing. The individual is just not trying hard enough. We have everything in place, and they can be better, and they just don't want to be better, or they just want to misuse the system. There is no system to misuse. There is no governmental system. There is no economic system. There is no infrastructural system. There is no community system. And there are the ruins of a medical system. What are individuals misusing? There's nothing to misuse. There's nothing to use. You need to have something to use before you misuse it. And I think in that space is where community empathy goes to die. Because if you have within yourself the capacity to tell someone else, this is an utter misuse of the system, you clearly have not understood the system. You clearly have not understood the limitations of the system. We cannot rely on, it is next to impossible to rely on the goodwill of non-governmental actors such as NGOs, private organizations, whatsoever, to fund and build the system. This is a right that needs to be fought for at the level of government. And it's high time that individuals started looking at the candidates they choose politically very seriously. It's not enough that the key issues of the country, such as religion, such as caste, such as I think those are the only two major issues that every politician has something to say, right? These are not the only issues that affect our country. These are not the only issues that affect human beings, right? But as long as they keep going out and making rallies, speeches, and whatever, and we continue electing them, there's no point, right? We have other rights that need guarantees. Our right to good air, our right to food that is untainted by chemicals, our right to clean water, our right to sanitation, our right to ensure safe access of uh, feminine hygiene products. These are things that every individual needs to go out there and also stand up for, right? And so, this is just a brief, I know it's in two parts, but this is just a brief summation of the things that have been happening within me cognitively and physically over the last 4 years of long COVID. Um, so, yeah, I would like to very sincerely make more videos like this and address some of the issues that I think long COVID for me um, has exposed.